Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar titled Greening the Future, Navigating Digital Transformation for Land Restoration. This webinar is a part of the ITU Digital Transformation Dialogue series. My name is Victoria Papp, Senior Director of Strategy and Innovation at BOMA Canada, and it is my pleasure to be your MC and moderator for today's session. This webinar will explore the intersection of digital innovations and land restoration, discussing the latest trends, challenges, and opportunities in combating desertification, enhancing drought resilience, and accelerate digital transformation through emerging technologies. ITU is pleased to organize this webinar together with the United Nations Environment Program and the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. Before we delve into the heart of our discussions today, I'd like to make a few notes on how the session will be run. So all questions from the audience will be taken during the Q&A session after the presentation. Participants can submit their questions by typing in the Q&A window, I believe at the bottom of the screen, and the Q&A icon can be seen at the bottom. Please indicate the city and country you are connecting from. We'd love to see where you are connecting from. The webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be made available on the event website afterwards. The presentations will also be made available on the website. So to begin today's webinar, I would like to call on Mr. Seizo Ono, Director of the Telecommunications Standardization Bureau, ITU. Over to you.
Thank you, colleagues and friends. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you for joining us, and a very warm welcome to you all. I would like to thank UN Environment and UNCCD for their support in organizing this webinar. On World Environment Day, we reaffirm our commitment to global action for environmental sustainability. ICTs and emerging technologies have a key part to play. To understand and protect our environment, there are enormous number of variables to consider and monitor continuously. New technologies are helping us to take great strides forward in our understanding of our natural world and how human activity affects it. Artificial intelligence is helping us to analyze vast amount of data in real time. Satellite imagery, for example, is the largest source of data on Earth's processes that we have ever had. Environmental monitoring with the Internet of Things is also giving us more accurate data on factors like air quality and temperature. We are gaining the ability to predict and track water shortages and drought and identify communities and ecosystems at risk. Breakthroughs in science and technology are creating new opportunities to achieve sustainable future. We must take full advantage of these opportunities. And as we gain new capabilities to protect our environment and the life it supports, we must ensure that we create global access to these capabilities. International standards can help drive inclusive global progress. International standards serve as a universal language that supports technology transfer and enable innovative digital tools to work together across borders. They provide a framework for best practice, ensuring data accuracy, interoperability, and sustainability. Building on standards, we can better harness technologies like remote sensing, AI, and big data to monitor, analyze, and restore ecosystem more efficiently. In uniting our efforts under these guidelines, we amplify our impact, fostering a greener, healthier planet for future generations. We are supporting better risk management in the face of natural hazards with our focus group on AI for natural disaster management, a group that is now transitioning into a new global initiative. And our focus group on digital agriculture is supporting global effort to improve the precision and sustainability of farming technologies. Today's webinar will speak to issues highly relevant to disaster risk reduction and agriculture, as well as the work of our standardization expert group for environmental sustainability, ICT Study Group 5, and IoT and Smart Cities and Communities, ITUT Study Group 20. I thank our speakers and everyone joining us online for your contribution to our discussion today. Together, let's champion international standards and lead the way to sustainable digital future. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Seiza Onoe, for these insightful remarks. They feed well into the presentations that we have up ahead. I would like to encourage the audience to type in any and all questions you have, and our panelists will do their best to answer them during the Q&A session. We have a fantastic lineup of panelists for this webinar, so without further delay, let us begin the session. So today we will dive into how digital technology is redefining the landscape of land restoration, particularly in our fight against desertification and in building drought resilience. As we embrace the digital revolution, tools like satellite imaging, blockchain, and AI are becoming crucial in our environmental efforts. In this session, we will explore the integration of technologies like IoT and machine learning into land management, discussing how these innovations offer new solutions for sustainable practices. We will also tackle the challenges and opportunities ahead, emphasizing the need for scalable and adaptable ICTs to maximize environmental impact as we navigate the complexities of digital transformation and environmental stewardship. And if we have sufficient time, of course, we will also have a question and answer period at the end. And we have lots of information to cover today. So without further delay, please welcome our first speaker, Jean-Manuel Canet, Senior Manager of Climate and Biodiversity at Orange Group. And he has developed an expertise in the assessment of the environmental impact of ICT goods, services, and organizations. So the floor is yours. Over to you.
Thanks very much for this introduction. I hope you can hear me clear. And I will now share my screen. So here we are. Can you see well my screen? Okay, it seems it's fine. So thanks very much for the opportunity to speak today on World Environment Day on this topic of land reborn and digital solutions for combating desertification and drought resilience. And so I will immediately start with giving you a view on what we see as potential and actual implementations of ICT and digital technologies that do help land restoration and drought preservation and improvement also of the biodiversity state in different regions of the world. So the ICT solutions, they can help, of course, on the species identification, on land and biodiversity monitoring. They can help to do some predictive modeling. They can help to do some habitat mapping and then help facilitate the restoration. So this can be done, you can see on the right-hand side in the image, through localized sensor platforms that are installed on land and that can use technologies such as bioacoustics or trap cameras. This can be done through sensors that are actually put on animals or on plants. And of course, there are all the capabilities that are brought by the remote sensing, by satellite imagery. This is very useful, of course, in order to follow the status of the land and to help restore it and to monitor during all the phases of a project the actual improvements and successes in land restoration. Now we have, of course, as well, the mobile robotic platforms with sensor payload. And in all this process, the weather monitoring sensors, of course, play a very important role, because we are speaking here about interaction between the land, the life that is taking place in the land, and the climate conditions. And we know, unfortunately, that the climate conditions are getting worse due to climate change. These ICT solutions, they can help also to perform some illegal activity detection, and during the process of restoration, to do some optimized planting, watering, all during all the lifetime of such a project. So I would like to give a few examples of the involvement of Orange in land restoration. So Orange has decided to have a very strong environmental policy to reduce its own GHG emissions in order, let's say, to have the least possible impact on climate, and also to create a full policy aimed at helping sequestration of carbon, and doing this through projects that can help biodiversity restoration and also land restorations. Orange has a footprint of activity with many countries of operations in Africa, in Middle East, where we know this topic of the risk on land degradation is very high, and land degradation has happened. So for several years, Orange subsidiaries have started to, let's say, to work on the field, like our subsidiary in Senegal, which is doing, let's say, restoration of mangroves. And more recently, we have started new projects. In Cameroon, for instance, we have an ongoing project with CIA partners to support NGO called Planète Urgence, in a large-scale project to restore and sustainably manage mangroves. Of course, digital solutions, the capability to look at cartographically the situation with the help of satellites imagery, and the capability to follow the progresses of the project is very important. To give you another example, in Madagascar, Orange has decided to help reforestation of degraded land with NGO Canopy, using in particular Pongamia in order to combat soil depletion and erosion, improve fertility of degraded soils, reproduce, conserve, and enhance the status of endemic species, and sequestrate carbon. And for all this, of course, digital solutions are key solutions that help doing and managing these projects with success. Without digital, of course, it would not be possible. at least at this speed. So I would like to speak a little bit and briefly about our involvement as well in the work of the ICT Study Group 5. So this is the study group dealing with environment, including climate, biodiversity topics, and land restoration is obviously one of the topics, important topics relatively to environment. So the study group 5 has started some work on the impact of ICT on biodiversity, and for this has had a particular look at the work of the Convention on Biological Diversity with the different goals that were set during the COP15, and in particular the target 1, which aims at planning, managing all areas to reduce biodiversity loss. And in this frame, we understand that ICT and digital technologies, they can help to perform this, let's say, monitoring of the status of the global land, but more is needed with enhanced data collection. And for this, as I was mentioning, we decided to start the development of some new standards with two visions, let's say, with two different documents. The first one is dealing with biodiversity footprint, that is to say, methodology for the assessment of the footprint of an ICT organization on biodiversity, taking into account the different frameworks that you can read here. And the second document is dealing with biodiversity opportunities with the development of guidance on how to assess what we call the second order effects, the positive effects, we hope, of the usage of ICT solutions on biodiversity, but I'm sure we will also consider specifically the topics of land restoration and handling of droughts in this document. So in particular, we will look at how to assess the impact of artificial intelligence, Earth observation, bioacoustics, collection analysis of data in the frame of this document. So I would like to encourage you to participate in this standardization work, which is a cooperative effort, which helps, let's say, share knowledge and best practices, and also help build the best possible guidance on how to maximize the potential and the implementation of ICT solutions in order to help land restoration. We'll have a meeting soon, that is to say from the 17th and to the 21st of June in Poland, but this is also accessible remotely. So if you would like to participate, you can please contact me and I will be happy to help. So with this, thanks so much for your attention, and I give you the floor back.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Jean-Manuel, for that insightful presentation. I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Please welcome Clara Vigenast, expert on digital transformation, Office of the Chief Digital Officer, United Nations Environment Program. And in this role, Clara supports the development of user-centered digital solutions that tackle the triple planetary crisis of climate change, nature loss, and pollution. So welcome, Clara, and the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can see my screen already. I think you can. And I hope you are seeing the correct format of the screen, like full screen, right? So, all right. Working. All right, everyone. So I'm going to give a little bit of the perspective from the United Nations Environment Program on digital transformation. And so what we do here as UNEP is we set the global environmental agenda, really, And we are promoting the coherent implementation of the environmental dimensions of the Sustainable Development Goals within the UN system, right? And we talk about the triple planetary crisis. So we talk about climate change, loss of nature and biodiversity, and pollution, right? So our goals here, climate stability, harmony with nature, and a pollution-free planet. And we have the digital transformation team that, of course, and like digital transformation initiative, that it cuts across all of those. So including land restoration and all of those efforts, right? Everything has or can have a digital component. And in our team, we look at what we call the two sides of the coin. So whenever we're talking about digitalization, for us, it's important to consider always the two sides. One of them is the digitalization to enable sustainability. So in this sense, developing and using a very user-centric and forward-looking strategy to create technologies, applications, or solutions that can tackle the triple planetary crisis, right? So using technology for environmental good, or land restoration in this case, and at the same time ensuring that digitalization is sustainable. So encouraging the development and use of digital technologies with sustainability considerations in mind. And for this, we need a very systemic approach, nurturing sustainability-focused digital public infrastructures, norms, incentives, and all of that, and also innovations that mitigate these environmental risks that come with more digitalization, with using more technology, right? So we talked a little bit about this also in the opening remarks, but I have here some examples of different digital technologies that we can use for land restoration, right? So for example, data collection and monitoring, that goes without saying, but we use, of course, different kinds of technology like remote sensing, drones, satellite imagery, and all of that can be used to collect data on the land conditions, which are essential for assessing the degradation, right, and the progress of restoration initiatives. Same for graphic information systems that allows us to connect information with a certain location. So, for example, to understand the current vegetation cover, the water resource that are used there, and then plan and implement this targeted, geographically relevant restoration activities. IoTs, we talked about this, or the previous speaker was talking about IoTs, which is different devices, right? Internet of Things, just to clarify, such as soil moisture sensors or weather stations that can provide this real-time data and monitoring of conditions, for example, for survival rates of newly planted vegetation. Big data and artificial intelligence, it's a very big topic, and AI really helps us to identify trends, predict outcomes, recommend best practices for land restoration, but for anything else related to the environment as well. Blockchain, for example, is a technology for funding allocation, right? If you want to have secure and transparent record of information, including financial information. Crowdsourcing and citizen science is very important for land restoration because this technology allows really community involvement and also collecting data, for example, for monitoring the on-site land, right, which is very important, and also creates that sense that the community is part of the land restoration projects. We also have simulations that are enabled by digital technology so that we can see where and how to best have these projects. And then we have knowledge sharing and collaboration platforms, which facilitate exchanging best practices and success stories, and knowledge transfer, capacity building. All of that goes into this as well. So technologies have several different use cases for achieving our environmental goals, and in this case, land restoration. So UNEP also is developing some of those. We call it the Digital Accelerator Lab, in which we look at use cases for environmental data and for technology. So one use case that I wanted to just give you some examples of what is being done inside UNEP in specific. So one of them is what we call Environment GPT. That is a large language model, so something like ChatGPT, that was trained exclusively on UNEP vetted data. That means that all the answers that you get from this chat are based on science that UNEP vetted. And it also gives you answers with references to where this information can be found. So that increases trust a lot. And it also enhances, the accessibility, the integration, and the application of the scientific knowledge to decisions in anything environment related. So at the moment, this tool is in testing. It is, as we said, it's a lab. So we're researching and developing at the moment on air quality, but we expect to expand this to any other environmental topic, including be it droughts or land restoration or whatever it is. So this is the case of using technology for enabling or making science more accessible for decision making. And then we have the UN Decades website, for example, which promotes the collaboration among governments, NGOs, local communities. And there you find a lot of information, right? And then we also have, I said here, coming soon, an entire UN Decade digital hub that will be dedicated for this networking, exchange of lessons learned and technical expertise. And it's coming soon, we expect still this year. And this is another way that we can bring the world together for, this problem that doesn't respect any boundaries, which is the environment. And here I also have one more example, which is the framework for ecosystem restoration monitoring. So it's the blue one there in the middle. This is an official monitoring platform that tracks the progress and disseminates these good practices for the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration. So this is information from country reported data, geospatial information, and also allows stakeholders to share their project information. So again, it's a place where you can have information, different kinds of informations analyzed in a way that is clear to visualize and to make decisions based on, right? So those are different use cases that we see for technology and environmental data. And of course, anything that we do in terms of digital technology, especially artificial intelligence, you need to have data behind it, right? And you need to have good data behind it. Otherwise, it's useless to have technology, right? To have this digitalization. So one of the things that we're working on at UNEP is the Global Environmental Data Strategy. And I wanted to bring it here because you cannot talk about digitalization without talking about data and specific data governance. So at the moment, UNEP is presenting these 5 key pillars for the Global Environmental Data Strategy, which is still under consultation and co-design process. But the pillars are improving data governance. So that means addressing the ethical, effective, and sustainable methodologies for environmental data management practices. Promoting inclusive data access and affordability. So detail the action items and policy recommendations to improve open access to environmental data and address the challenges related to affordability. Promote data interoperability, so identifying and integrating this global and thematic data standards into a global environmental data framework that would then allow for the efficient sharing among stakeholders. And here, notice I said also thematic data, right? So all of the different thematic data and standards need to be interoperable. They just need to speak with each other. And enhance, and again, I'm not talking about standards, I'm talking about, the Global Environmental Data Strategy is not standards, right? It's a framework for this efficient sharing. And then enhancing the data quality and authentication. So discuss this framework and standards for defining and classifying environmental data quality levels. And facilitating capacity building, that is very important as well. Ensuring member states and the public also has the skills for managing data, right? So this is an important consideration, but the other side of the coin, as I said in the beginning, is the environmental impacts of all of that, right? So while digital and in specific AI can solve several environmental challenges, as we've seen in other presentations, and as I said, it is also very important to keep sustainability as a priority as you are developing and thinking about what kind of solution you're going to use, what kind of technology you're going to use, because it has a significant environmental footprint, right? So I brought some examples here just for us to think about. Electricity, for example. By 2030, artificial intelligence could use twice the energy of all of France. A request on ChatGPT can exhaust 100 times more energy than a normal search engine. Carbon footprint. We have generative AI responsible for as much emission as the aviation sector. And training one large language model equals 125 round-trip flights between New York City and Beijing. And then we have life cycle, which has the fastest growing waste streams in the world, which is e-waste, and only 22% of it is recycled. In terms of rare earth minerals, which are critical for data centers, only 1% is recycled. And then water usage. AI in specific demands a lot of water, and it's expected by 2027 that it will be half of the UK demand. And again, training one large language model needs to, for the cooling data centers, 3 Olympic-sized swimming pools daily. So we need to always think about whenever we're coming up with innovations, is it worth it? So here are my main takeaways. Technology comes with risks and opportunities. And from our point of view, what we need to do is enhance transparency, accountability, and impact analysis. So we need to advance those technologies, but also implement mechanisms to assess and disclose the environmental impacts of these digital systems through their entire life cycles, and then make decisions. Is it worth it? And how can we make it better? How can we decrease the impact, the environmental impact? Sustainability by design, again, while digital technologies can have all of these benefits, we must, when designing it, already consider the energy consumption, the carbon emissions, the water usage, the e-waste, and then think about how to minimize those and ensure, as we are developing in the very early stages, those things are considered. And establishing an effective environmental data governance. So the identification and adoption of best practices in global and thematic environmental data standards that enable technology and AI-ready environmental data and machine-readable data formats is key for a high-quality digital and especially AI applications. So as I mentioned, UNEP is in the process of conducting these multi-stakeholder consultations to collect insights on data governance and practices. So that's it from my side. I will give back the floor.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Clara, for that wonderful presentation, and of course, sharing the important work of UNEP. So thank you so much for that. Now I'd like to take the time to welcome our next speaker, Arthur Essenfelder. Dr. Arthur is a scientific project officer at the European Commission's Joint Research Center, working on the exploratory research project AI Enhanced Agroclimate Service, in collaboration with the Scientific Development and the Disaster Risk Management Unit. So over to you, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Also, greetings, everyone. It's a pleasure to be able to be here. I'm not sure if you're going to share the screen from your side, or should I proceed on my end? I think it's coming. Yes, there you go. So there's the beginning of my presentation. So as you can see here, my presentation is going to focus a little bit more on drought resilience. So I'm going to be exploring and showcasing one of the latest developments that we're doing here at the Joint Research Center. For those that don't know, the Joint Research Center is the scientific body of the European Commission, where we provide scientific information for the member states and the general public. And basically what we're trying to tackle here, we're trying to use an AI system to support us into enhancing drought risk management. And this is going to be focused particularly on agriculture. So next slide, please. I'd just like to start my presentation by showing a little bit more on the motivation behind this work. So as you can see here, like what we see being shown on the slide right now, it's basically the latest report from the World Economic Forum that is basically showing the global risk landscape with regards to different types of, let's say, areas that might be of concern, so related to environmental, economics, geopolitical, and so on. And what we can see is that on the short term, basically in the, let's say from today and in a 2 years time span, we see that the dominating factors are basically extreme weather events. So how these extreme weather events can have an impact in our societies and environment and so on. And the second one is basically the information that we might be generating from AI and machine learning, and basically a concern related to the misinformation and disinformation that might be related to that. We already saw also from the presentations from the last speakers that basically AI has lots of potentials. It has also the risks related to that. And one of those is exactly this, it's related to the misinformation and disinformation. Throughout this presentation, you're going to show that we keep this in mind, basically these two topics, and this is where we're trying to be able to approach this and to provide more information related to how we can actually provide a system that can increase a little bit more the trust on the outcomes that are being generated by the system itself. In that sense, we see that there is a lot of activities going on related to AI developments. So we already mentioned, for instance, the focus group on AI for natural disaster management, but also other ones that we can mention outside of the EU, like, for instance, the NOAA AI Center. What is interesting to highlight here, and what we're seeing right now on the slide on the top right side here, it's basically that while we have this growing interest in the application of AI and machine learning for disaster risk reduction, we see that some of those different types of disasters might be underrepresented. And what I highlight here is the case of droughts, for instance. You can see here that from this recent overview in terms of application of machine learning for disaster risk reduction, drought is representing something around 2% of the total applications that have been scanned by scientific publications. While if you consider, for instance, the contribution in terms of exposure, people that are exposed to the different types of disasters, basically it's a clear underrepresentation with regards to droughts, which basically rank as the second most important disaster in terms of the annual average number of people that it's affected by this type of disasters. So there seems to be a gap in terms of the number of applications using AI to deal with drought risks. We can go to the next slide then, please. And we can basically attribute these to the complexity that exists in terms of the detection and also forecasting of drought events. So droughts are a little bit more complex if you compare, for instance, in terms of detection, and if you compare, for instance, with floods or tropical cyclones, because they're a little bit more challenging to define in space and in time, when they start, when they finish, and basically the geographical boundaries of the event. What you see here on the right side, you see 4 panels showing basically the evolution of what has been the drought event in 2022 over Europe. And those are considering the same indicator, the standardized precipitation index, but this is being shown for different accumulation periods for 1, 3, 6, and 12 months. Those images that we see, the animation, they are they are time locked, sorry. So we can see that they are basically showing the same day for the 4 different plots. But what we see is that the representation of the dimension of the drought events as considered by those 4 different accumulation periods, they change quite significantly from one consideration to the other one. What we see here basically in the animation on the right side has been just related to the meteorological drought definition, so basically related to the lack of precipitation. But of course, droughts can have much more or a broader consequence. So for instance, you might have impacts that goes to a lack of water in soil, so basically impacts in the soil moisture that can lead to impacts in agriculture. It can cascade down also to reduce stream flow and eventually also reduce availability of groundwater. So it's quite a complex event when we talk about drought. It's very difficult to detect in time and space, and it might explain why we see a kind of underrepresentation in terms of application of AI. If we go to the next slide, yes, thank you. Yes, thank you. Basically, what we try to do here, then, we try to approach this problem by considering two areas of expertise of the JRC in terms of production of data that is related to drought risk management. So on the left side, basically what is being shown here, it's a monthly bulletin that is produced by the JRC. It's called the Mars bulletins, and these are basically providing information related to different types of areas of concern that might be relevant and might translate into impacts in agriculture. So for instance, those might try to detect, for instance, not just drought events, but also information that can be related to impacts that might develop in agriculture, such as heat wave or rain deficit, or for instance, cold spell and so on. So it's a kind of a multi-hazard system that is heavily based on the expertise of the analyst to do this detection and this kind of study to provide this kind of a summary of information that might be translated into impacts into the agricultural system of Europe. On the right side, we have two systems that are part of the Copernicus program, in particular of the Copernicus Emergency Management System. We have the European Drought Observatory and the Global Drought Observatory, and information that is provided specifically to deal with drought risk. So, for instance, information is provided related to the lack of precipitation in terms of precipitation anomalies, or anomalies related to soil moisture, or also vegetative responses related, for instance, to some sort of precipitation anomaly, or also the presence of a heat wave or some sort of temperature anomaly. If we go to the next slide, then basically I can start to introduce what we try to do in terms of the methods here. What we try to do here, we try basically to create a multi-system that is based on the detection of those different types of areas of concern that we're so calling here. And as you can see, they are defined here on the table up above. So we have, for instance, information related to rain excess or rain deficit, heat wave, cold spell, hot and dry conditions, drought events, but also temperature accumulation, surplus or deficit in certain areas. And we try to combine, as I mentioned before, those information being provided by the Copernicus Emergency Management Service, but also some sort of meteorological information that can allow us to do this kind of analysis. In this case here, we're using a reanalysis product that it's the RF5. What we do, basically, we train a machine learning model that it's a gradient boosted decision tree model. We can move to the next slide. We can also then start to see a little bit more on the results of that. We approach this problem in a kind of probabilistic manner. So we train not just one model, but we train a series of them in order to increase the trust and the robustness of the results that we might get. And each kind of initialization of the model, it's a little bit different in order that the different models can have different data that is presented to them and different initial conditions, and this might lead to a different optimization of the results. What we see here is basically just the progression of the training. So we can see in the blue lines, we show the training results for those 1,000 different models. We see the progression as we add more trees to make the model more complex. And in the red line, basically what we see is the validation set. So this is the data that we use in order to be sure that the results that we're getting out of the model, they are not being overfitted, and they are capable of actually generating results that are valid and that can be used for the purposes that we want. If we move to the next slide, we can also start to see a little bit in terms of the information that I mentioned before, that it's quite relevant in terms of the transparency and the explainability of the model. So basically what we see here is 3 different metrics that allow us to evaluate which of the different types of inputs that we're considering to the system, they are seen as more relevant for the detection of a certain type of area of concern. For instance, if we see here the case of heat waves, that is the second row, we see that the variable that seems to be the dominating factor is basically the frequency of days where a certain temperature threshold it's achieved. In this case, it's 30 degrees Celsius. Each one of those 3 metrics, they provide complementary information. So for instance, the frequency metric will be showing how many times a certain input feature has been considered by the model, while the other metrics might be more related to how those different input information might lead to a better explanation or explanatory capability of the model itself. If we go to the next slide. Thank you. We can start to see a little bit on how these kind of results look like in a kind of spatial way or in maps. So in this case here, what we see in the top row, it's basically the results for the training data set, and it shows basically how this system would be performing into the detection of droughts for a particular time step. And the second row basically that we see, it's for the test data set. The test data set is completely out of sample, so this would be a kind of a real case application of the model in terms of the detection of the areas of concern, in this case for droughts. We see also here on the right side, again, highlighting the transparency and the explainability of the model, showing which kind of features would be more relevant and how they are considered, considering those 3 different types of metrics that I discussed before. We can move on to the next slide then, please. Of course, this is a multi-system, and it's a system that can provide information for the different types of hazards that I mentioned before, or for the different types of areas of concern that we're considering. And this type of information can then be output, as I mentioned, in a sort of probabilistic way. So we can enhance also like the trust in the results and how robust they are by taking a look into, for instance, how probable a certain area is in terms of being classified as of concern or not. And we can also compute, for instance, which can be the spread of the model. So basically, how much is, for instance, would be the standard deviation or the degree of agreement between the models into performing this detection. What we see here is just an example comparing the results that we see here on the right side of the model system, compare actually to the analysis that have been done by the analyst on the very left side of this slide. We can move on to the next slide, please. Again, this slide is just to highlight that different types of factors are relevant, and this case is focusing again on droughts. So we have 2 of the main variables that describe here. In this case, the first one on the central part of the plot is the soil moisture anomaly, and on the bottom part is the vegetation anomaly. We can then move to the next slide, but it's basically the conclusions of the presentation. No, sorry, there's this one before. There is basically just a kind of a conversion from the probabilistic results to a kind of deterministic one. And since we have different levels of agreement between the model, or this kind of spread between the different ensemble members of the model, we can then take different kind of thresholds to perform this kind of deterministic detection. So what we see here, for instance, on the slide A, or the part A, would be the actual results coming from the analysts. On the right side, on the image that is highlighted as B, we can see when basically like 2/3 of the model agree into the detection of a certain area of concern. The image C is showing when we have 90% of agreement, and the image D is 95% of agreement. And then we can move, I believe that now should be the concluding slide. Yes, exactly. So basically what we show here is basically just a kind of an application on how AI can support this kind of detection of multi-hazards, particularly in agriculture. This is a kind of an hybrid system because we're using information that is coming already from experts, while we're combining these also with very data-intensive information coming from meteorological data sets, but also from the Copernicus Emergency Management Service. And we've shown how this can actually be used for the detection of spatial in time of multi-hazards. And also we've shown that also these kind of methods can be used to deal with disaster risk reduction and disaster risk management, particularly for droughts. Highlights here is that this kind of application that we show and the methods that we chose, they are interpretable and transparent. And this can have, of course, some policy relevance. What I highlight here, for instance, it can be related to the World Meteorological Organization in the recently launched initiative, or the Early Warning for All, that basically call for the development of this kind of multi-hazard systems. And we believe that this kind of application that we develop could indeed foster this kind of development. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Arthur, for that insightful presentation. I particularly liked the animated maps in your presentation, which were really great to see. So I want to be mindful of the time, but I did want to take an opportunity very briefly to do some question and answers. I do see we have some in the chat as well, but being mindful of the time, I wanted to ask you all one question, and please take 1 minute to answer because we are running out of time. And that one question is, if you were to leave the audience with one piece of advice or one takeaway from today's session, what would it be? So Arthur, since your camera is on, I'll turn it over to you first, and then I'll turn it over to the other panelists as well.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. I think that the message that I would like to do and goes in line with the presentation that I gave is that AI, it really offers us lots of possibilities to do, particularly with big data, but it should be seen as a system that can support us into taking decisions and not in replacing the work of an analyst, of an expert. So it should really be seen as a kind of a side tool that can really provide us with information in terms of development or our capabilities in deal with ever-growing quantities of data and variety and so on. So I think this would be the message that I'd like to be like the takeaway from to the audience. Yes.
A great takeaway. Jean-Manuel, over to you.
Thank you very much, Victoria. I believe just to say that it's very important to be able to measure the progress month after month and to assess the benefits that are brought by the usage of digital technologies for land restoration and so on. It's very important to actually do these assessments, to put some effort on that, because often there are no sufficient efforts put, no sufficient people even trained to do so. So I would like to bring this message of the importance of training on these topics, how digital transformation can help towards this goal, and performing actually the assessments month after month. Thank you.
Wonderful. A great takeaway. Measurement is key. I always say you can't manage what you can't measure. So great takeaway. Thank you. And Clara, over to you.
Yeah, I can only echo what the colleagues said. I think those were present in almost every presentation we've been talking about those elements. And also, again, the two sides of the coin is always use technology for the benefit of the environment, but also ensure that the negative impacts are accounted for and mitigated. That's the main message always.
Wonderful. Thank you. A great takeaway. Of course, keeping sustainability and environment in mind is always key. Wonderful. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our distinguished panelists for taking us through these exciting discussions, which we believe will be a cornerstone for future standardization work on this topic. But before we conclude this episode, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Dominique Burgess to deliver the closing remarks and wrap up today's session. Mr. Dominique is the Director of Institutional Relations for Standardization at Orange. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Victoria. I hope my sound is okay now.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. Yes, so thank you. And also, in addition, I'm chairman of the ITUT Study Group 5, which has been referred several times during that meeting. So thank you, Victoria, and dear ladies, gentlemen, Mr. TSB Director. So as we draw this insightful webinar to a close, I would like first to extend our heartfelt thanks to our co-organizer. So that means the United Nations Environment Programme, the UNEP, the United Nations Conventions to Combat Desertification, so in association with ITU. Your collaboration, Clara is here, yes, your collaboration and commitment have been instrumental in making today's event a success, because I saw at some point more than 140 participants. I recall also that today it is the World Environment Day, and that's why it has been particularly meaningful to come together and discuss the vital role of digital solutions in combating desertification and enhancing drought resilience. We chose this day to underscore the importance of these topics, emphasizing that our efforts in land restorations are crucial to the health of our planet and the well-being of future generations. During our discussion today, we highlighted the transformative potential of information and communication technologies in land restorations, from satellite imaging to blockchain and the integration of AI, IoT, and machine learning. We are witnessing a revolution in how we approach environmental stewardships. These technologies not only help us monitor and manage land degradation, but also empower us to implement innovative solutions for sustainable land use and restoration. This today's session was particularly interesting, as very quickly noted, and we learned how digital solutions can help in global analysis of trends with appropriate data, on operational projects such as reforestation and land restoration, and with focus by the last speaker from the European Commission on the role of artificial intelligence. We also heard that is a little bit the wrong side of the medals about the risk associated, as for example, an increased use of electricity and water, and that is also of a big concern. I noted also with interest that some tools are developed, for example, in UNEP with the digital accelerators, and the role of research as developed by the European Commission Joint Research Center, and the role of AI in natural disaster management. And finally, at global level, and come back to what I heard from the first speaker, also biodiversity has been taken on board at the COP meetings, and you know that is the next challenge. At COP meetings, and also because it is our task in ITUT Study Group 5, by Study Group 5, which is developing related standards. So the work of ITUT Study Group 5 on environment, climate change, and circular economy, and particularly is focused on biodiversity and the reduction of the ICT sector's environmental impact, has been addressed, and is an example on how sector-specific initiatives can have far-reaching benefits. The insights shared today reaffirm the necessity and potential of ICT solutions in achieving land restoration and biodiversity goals. My colleague Jean-Manuel did advertise about our next meeting, so I will not come back on this. That will take place in a couple of days, so you are free to join, and will be very warmly welcomed. And all info have been posted on the chat. Additionally, within ITUT also, the efforts of the ITUT Study Group 20 in promoting digital transformation highlight the synergetic relationship between technological advancements and sustainability, and demonstrate how smart cities and IoT technologies can support sustainable development and biodiversity conservation. As we look forward, it is important to recognize the ongoing efforts, the growing need for ICTs in biodiversity conservation and land restoration. Our work does not end here. It continues with renewed vigor and commitments. And in November, coming back to the COP, the global community will come together for the COP29. This significant event will further our strides towards achieving global environment goals. Let us carry forward the momentum from today's webinar and continue to champion the cause of sustainable land management for digital innovation. So I do encourage each of you to take the insight and inspiration from today's sessions and drive change within your own spheres of influence. And thank you once again for your participation, and I wish you all a happy World Environment Day, and let us continue to work together. So Victoria, floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dominique, for your closing remarks. I'd just like to mention our digital transformation dialogues will continue to hold sessions. So please don't miss the upcoming Ask the Expert session in French on Rester connecté, explorer l'itinérance mobile internationale. Stay connected, exploring international mobile roaming on the 27th of June, 2024. My ITU colleagues will provide the link in the chat if you're interested. Thank you all for your participation and wishing you a wonderful rest of your day ahead. Thank you so much and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.